Knowledge by description. Here's an objection that Russell made to himself. I think this is really noteworthy. All great philosophers see objections to their own points of view, and I hope you'll take that idea to heart when you're doing writing for this course as well. Always consider objections to your own point of view. Even if you can't answer the objections, often you can't, it will make your position stronger to see the objections, to see the problems. So what was Russell's objection? It involved Julius Caesar. We're going to talk a lot about Julius Caesar. That's Russell's example. I've just stuck with it. Russell says, thus, when, for example, we make a statement about Julius Caesar, it is plain that Julius Caesar is not before our minds, since we are not acquainted with him. Right? So few of us are old enough to have ever met Julius Caesar, to have perceived him, to remember him, and he's certainly not an object of self-awareness. So it seems absolutely right here, we're not acquainted with Julius Caesar. Why is that a problem? Well, actually I want to hand that over to you. So what I'd like you to do, please, ideally you're watching this with somebody, 90 seconds, what actually is the objection here? What is Russell objecting to, and what is the objection? Go. Okay, so if things have gone well, you've understood that I was just asking you, what's Russell objecting to, and what's his objection? And you've had a bit of a think about that, hopefully even a discussion with a friend. That would be great. Well done if you have. I'm really pleased about that. Okay, good. Now I'm going to tell you what I think the answer to those questions might be. One thing you'll get to know is that I'm not always right. So, we can think about Julius Caesar. We are not acquainted with Julius Caesar. Therefore, it seems to follow that this can't be true. All our knowledge, both knowledge of things and knowledge of truths, rest upon acquaintance as its foundation. Right? So you do know some things about Julius Caesar. Okay, I suppose, I guess, I hope you do, right? It's sort of difficult to find cultural references that everybody gets, but Julius Caesar seems pretty good. Pretty good bet here. If you don't know things about Julius Caesar, you really need to spend quite urgently some time with, Wikipedia or some other reliable source of information. Anyway, so come back, you've been to Wikipedia, you know something about Julius Caesar. He's from a long time ago, that's the key part for us. So you're not acquainted with him. You know some things about him. But what Russell appears to be saying here is that you can only know things about him if you're acquainted with him. And it looks like 1 and 2 contradict that. And so Russell's principle would be false. There's the objection. The objection is an objection to this claim under 3, Russell's principle of acquaintance. And the objection is based on the idea that we can know things about Julius Caesar, although none of us are acquainted with him. So what does Russell say? Well, he says, we have in mind some description of Julius Caesar, the man who was assassinated on the Ides of March perhaps, or the founder of the Roman Empire, perhaps some other idea. I didn't actually check what Wikipedia says, I should find out before I do these things. Anyway, so Russell's idea is very simple. there is this description, and in the case of something like Julius Caesar, with which we're not acquainted but can nevertheless think about, it's our knowledge of the description that allows us to think about that thing. Interesting idea. Okay, so what's behind this then is Russell's theory is the idea that there is actually not one but two ways of linking thoughts to objects. There is not just acquaintance, but there is also knowledge by description. Russell says, when we know that the property or properties in question belong to one object and no more, we are said to have knowledge of that object by description, whether or not we're acquainted with the object. So here's Russell explaining the notion of knowledge by description. This is what Russell has in mind for knowledge by description. So if you're ever wondering to yourself, you know, gosh, what is this knowledge by description business? This is the answer. This is the answer. That's what Russell says about knowledge by description. And as I said, that's contrasted with the notion of acquaintance. So it's possible for you to think about things either because you're acquainted with them, or because you have knowledge by description of them. But those two things are supposed to be related. You see, acquaintance is supposed to be the more fundamental thing, and the description stuff essentially is supposed to kind of leverage your knowledge, your acquaintance, sorry. Let me say that one more time. The acquaintance is supposed to be the more fundamental thing. Knowledge by description essentially is supposed to provide a way of kind of leveraging your acquaintance to enable you to think about a wider set of things. That's the idea that Russell has. And that's why all of this turns out to be compatible with the principle of acquaintance. Now, if that's right, what was wrong with this objection? If that's a good reply to the objection from Julius Caesar, what was wrong with this objection? That's actually a very good question. Why don't you turn to the people that you're watching this with? I hope you're watching it with some people if you are, if that's how you work best. In 90 seconds, what then is wrong with this objection to Russell's principle of acquaintance? Why is this not actually a good objection, even though it should seem like one? 90 seconds, go. So why is this apparently, but not actually, a good objection to Russell's principle of acquaintance? Well, here's what I think. What we've got to do is reject the idea that the third thing follows from the first two. So we're not rejecting the first thing, we're not rejecting the second thing. We're accepting both of those, we're embracing them. We're rather saying that the third thing doesn't follow from the first two. Right? Why is that? It's because the principle of acquaintance doesn't really say you can only think about things with which you're acquainted. I like that as a first draft. It's kind of simple, right? You can only think about things with which you're acquainted. It would be great if that were true, because it would be very simple. What it actually says is that acquaintance is fundamental to being able to think about things at all. But there is this way of leveraging, I'm not sure. There is this way of leveraging your acquaintance. Right? using descriptions that gives you knowledge by descriptions. And so, although at bottom it comes right down to acquaintance, everything Russell says rests upon acquaintance as its foundation, nevertheless, you don't have to be acquainted with things in order to think about them. So it doesn't follow that Russell's principle is false just because you can think about things like Julius Caesar with which you're not acquainted. That's very good. So where are we in summary? We know what Russell's principle of acquaintance is. We understand the objection, or apparent objection, to that principle from the case of Julius Caesar. And we understand the reply, which involves introducing this notion of knowledge by description. So that's actually quite a big chunk of work that we've just done. Well done us.